Welcome to the Screen Podcast, offering you insight and analysis of the global film industry, brought to you by the teams of Screen International and ScreenDaily.com. I'm your host, Wendy Mitchell, contributing editor at Screen, and I'm joined today by Deputy Editor Louise Tutt. Hi, Louise.
Hey, Wendy.
And European Editor Tim Dams. Hi, Tim.
Hello, Wendy.
Great to have you both back on. We're going to wade into some troubled waters with this episode, I think it's safe to say. We're going to be looking at the latest in this Nadav Lapid controversy that erupted at FID Marseille and beyond, and talking a bit about this resurgence of the open letter and do they work? Do they not? When are they dangerous? When are they great? And I have to say, I remember we did an episode about Trisha Tuttle at Berlinale, and I said something like I had liked one of her public statements, and somebody called me a Zionist on the internet for even saying that I liked a film festival director's statement. So it's a complicated situation, and we know, people feel very passionately about this subject. We're going to try to keep it, professional. I'm just going to summarize a little bit about this Nadav Lapid situation for people who haven't been following it. So Nadav is the Israel-born filmmaker. He's lived in Paris for the past 5 years. He has been very publicly critical of Israel's government, and especially Netanyahu, and has made films that are very critical of the Israeli state, I think is safe to say. And he was set to be on the jury at FID Marseille. And the FID Marseille organizers decided to, ask him to step down from the jury and instead do a masterclass. And this was because a Palestinian group, or pro-Palestinian group called Palestine Will Save Cinema, had called for a cultural boycott of all Israeli artists. And they said placing Palestinian and Israeli narrative side by side within the same space of representation, as if they were strictly equivalent, erases power relations, history, and material conditions. Understandably, Nadav sort of kind of went away quietly, I guess, at first, or he just says also, like, I'm not coming to do your masterclass if I can't be on your jury. And like I said, he's been living in France for 5 years. And then there was, once this news got out, there was an open letter signed by hundreds of major French filmmakers and artists, saying that, that we should not be excluding a filmmaker for discussion and creation. And this undermines a certain vision of cinema and culture. And then there was, after that first letter, there was a second letter, also, I think, published in Le Monde, that was signed by Natalie Portman, Jacques Audiard, Justine Triet, saying those who call for artists to be completely erased from the public sphere must be opposed. Nobody should be reduced to a passport. And what I found really strange about this is the FID Marseille director, Sveta Dobreva, said, at least a dozen filmmakers had wanted to remove their films if Nadav had appeared at the festival. We don't know who those filmmakers are. That was never announced. And so this woman who's running the festival and has asked Nadav not to be on the jury, I suppose, then signs the letter in support of him. I don't understand that piece of the puzzle so well. If you really want to support him, keep him at your festival. Louise, did you follow all these open letters?
I did follow all the open letters, and I think the impact of them in this case was interesting because I wasn't aware of the Nadav Lapid situation at FID Marseille before these open letters. So while sometimes the origins of them and the motivation for them can be a little bit strange, I think what did work this time is they brought this issue out into the open. And when I say issue, I mean very, very complex, nuanced debate that really needs to make room for so many different viewpoints, all of which can be true at the same time. And it can be true that Nadav Lapid is, as you say, he's lived in exile. His films rage against the Israeli government. He's personally and frequently described the actions of the Israeli government in Gaza as a genocide. I mean, this is a man who the Israeli state would quite like to silence. But then it's
and
also,
they've said they will never fund him again. So
yeah,
yes, very much.
but up to, it's also true that his films are partly funded by the Israel Film Fund, which is financed by the Israeli Ministry of Culture. They're partly financed by the Israeli Film Fund, which is a department of the Israeli government. And it's also true that it's not his government who is silencing him right now. It's also true to say the Arab filmmakers who pulled out of FID Marseille and who, like you say, the Palestinian Cinema Organization, which organized the boycott, or the organization called Palestinian Cinema Will Save Us, their statement on the fact that placing Palestinian and Israeli narratives side by side as if they were strictly equivalent erases power relations, history and material conditions. This is also absolutely true. And I guess the debate here is, where should we be having this debate? And the answer ideally is at film festivals. Film festivals, evolved after the Second World War to be these places to create an cultural understanding and hold this debate where freedom of speech is welcome and where all perspectives are welcome. And what has failed here is the ability for the festival to be able to have both Nadav Lapid and the Arab filmmakers. And in this case, it is an open letter that brought that to our attention.
Yeah, exactly. I should say there's been a little update on Tuesday morning, which I think is a really great update in this situation. Because I work for film festivals too. I understand you want first and foremost, you want your audiences to be safe. So if there's any kind of public safety threat, then that is first and foremost on any festival organizer's mind. And I know Toronto's had to pull screenings, for instance, for public safety concerns.
And the London Film Festival.
Yeah, and London Film Festival. But yeah, no film festival director wants to be put in this position. And I should say, on Tuesday morning, France's film body, the CNC, said they have created a support service for artists and industry professionals facing attempts to restrict their freedom of creation. This is from CNC President Gaëtan Brule, who I think is really smart in that job. And one thing I love about this is it's not just saying we're protecting filmmakers, and they specifically are putting this out there in response to the Nadav Lapid situation. But he's also saying the CNC wants to really say this is a support service for filmmakers, artists, producers, festival organizers. Because, this is not an easy position for these festival organizers to be in. And I really love that the CNC has recognized that as well. It's not just filmmakers who might be feeling silenced. It could be festival directors or artistic directors. So I really applaud the CNC for this move. And I think, again, this should be on every side of every debate, that somebody who feels creatively threatened can go to the CNC. So well done to them.
I think you're absolutely right, Wendy, though, that it's good also that they're talking about supporting the festivals and the programmers, because these are not easy decisions. These are really, really difficult conversations, and there's a lot at stake here. And often, festival programmers are not the best people to make that.
They're not politicians.
Decision. They're not. No. Then and it's hard. All of this is hard. It's an awful, impossible, hard situation. And I think that there is no there is no black and white. There are lots of blacks and lots of whites, but they're all equally, they're all equally true, and that creates grey. And that's
and nobody on the internet wants grey, Louise.
Well, nobody who feels passionately wants grey either. Although, or we would all prefer it to be black and white. We would all prefer it to be, and it's just not, and it's hard. And I think that all we can do is keep talking about it. And I think that's where the support for festivals needs to come in, to give them the support so that they can be the spaces where you have this debate. So let's see what comes of the CNC.
And I think the concern really is that, some see these letters perhaps or these campaigns as kind of intimidation campaigns at worst. And so you then get a situation where festivals are just concerned about programming challenging films about challenging topics and just move away from that space completely. So nothing ends up getting debated, and you have a silencing going on as a result.
That's so true.
Yeah, that we're all just watching rom-coms from Netflix at a film festival because it won't offend anybody, and like nobody wants that.
It's going to make such a difference to the kind of films that are financed, and we will just end up in a world of rom-coms, which is we love a romantic comedy, but we don't want the entire world to be a romantic comedy, because that doesn't cover the full spectrum of art and debate and conversation, and I think that's the risk. That's the risk here. It's festivals aren't going to, you could argue that the Cannes selection was quite safe in retrospect. Let's see what happens at Venice and Toronto and San Sebastian going forward.
Yeah. But of course, we did have a Russian filmmaker living in exile in Cannes, and I didn't see them. They were less visible. I'm sure Terry Fremo got protests, or I know they were worried about that red carpet.
I think you're talking about Andrei Zagudovits.
Zvyganevskov.
Yes, of the director of Minotaur.
Yes.
And I think they were able to make clear delineations. His film was financed by French sources.
Without any Russian
state financing. Bearing in mind his films is in a curious echo of the Israeli situation. His films in the past, which have always been, again, fiercely critical of the Russian government and Russian state apparatus, Leviathan, The Return, have been financed by, Russian public financing, almost as if the Russian government says, look, we're perfectly sane. Look at us allowing these films to be made. And I think it's a similar situation with the Israeli film fund. It does allow these films to be made. And it is, arguably, it's, film washing. But Minotaur wasn't made with any Russian money. The director has been in exile for a few years now, and the film is anti, it's a satire about, the Russians' invasion of Ukraine. So it was weirdly apolitical at Cannes. It almost wasn't really discussed in that sense, I think. But again, it was easy to say that film was a Russian filmmaker in exile.
Yeah. And then you had, last year, by comparison, at Venice, you had huge marches, in support of, or protesting against Israeli actions in Gaza. That erupted, actually. There was, thousands and thousands of people made their way to the festival. And, the festival was dealing with, or had to deal with a very, intense political situation. But I think this whole thing, though, speaks to the times we live in, doesn't it? It's an obvious thing to say, but, I'm speaking from the UK today. We're on our kind of latest prime minister change this week, and this is all, everyone says this is all driven by, the intensity of the times that we live in, the social media age, and the need, to communicate effectively. And, everywhere you look, there are challenges. But, in a weird way, being a festival director now is almost, you've got to navigate just such a difficult kind of landscape, I think, as a kind of prime minister has really, or something.
I agree, for sure. And we should mention this other, Rebecca talked about it a lot on the Cannes podcast, but there was, of course, this Canal Plus open letters, and that turned into a big storm. That was people coming out saying that they, a lot of filmmakers, especially in France, more than 600, said they didn't want the influence of the right, specifically the Bollore group, which has a 30% stake in Canal Plus, interfering with Canal Plus's content. And Maxime Sada came out saying, anybody who signed this petition, we're not going to work with you again, which I find really reactionary. And, that is now, he's being criticized for the threat to free speech, that if he's looking at those 600, that he's going to sort of blacklist them. And that has grown into a storm. I don't think we've had many developments since May on that.
Well, one thing I've heard is that there's quite a lot of backpedaling from the people that signed that open letter.
Interesting. Yeah.
A little bit worried about the impact on their careers. Yeah, unfortunately.
And I think that petition...
a lot of calls to agents saying, perhaps remove my name.
What do we do? Yeah. And I think it's grown to more than 3,000 names, people like Ken Loach, Yorgos Lanthimos, etc. Tim, were you tracking that one?
Yeah, well, I mean, that all blew up during Cannes, and obviously, I think Maxime Saada made his comments at a Cannes lunch, and then you got that whole situation during the festival. There were kind of boos sometimes during festival screenings when the Canal Plus logo appeared on screen. So it was a really big kind of talking point, and you don't often get somebody like saying what Saada did and coming back and pushing back and actually criticizing the people who signed a kind of petition. But maybe this is a kind of new development.
Again, it speaks to the times, doesn't it?
Yeah.
That kind of reaction.
And to be honest, I was just kind of tracking some of the other petitions that have been happening this year that we at Screen have covered. And, there was one from, a whole bunch of EU filmmakers signed an open letter calling for, more EU support for cinema, and then Agora EU program. I mean, there's been a big, there was a lot of protest against the Paramount-Warner Bros merger, lots of filmmakers signing that. You've had... We've reported on petitions or open letters about AI, about residuals. And I was trying to think, over our years at Screen, I think there's definitely an acceleration in these number of open letters going on.
Oh yes, there certainly are.
And to us, I think that must be because they speak to the times. They people must think of them as being effective. I think occasionally they do work. Sometimes they backfire badly, but they are effective at quickly, raising an issue. And they're much easier to organize now. You can use social media, you can use email. You don't have to kind of phone people, or they can quickly kind of take off in a way that they perhaps never could do. So I think they are. I mean, they're nothing new either. I mean, I was kind of looking back quickly, and the open letter took off in the 18th and 19th century when newspapers first took off, and people started writing to newspapers, and they were very effective for the anti-slavery campaign, for example. But it feels like there's rocket fuel under them at the moment, and
I think that's the challenge, isn't it? There are so many that I think we have a bit of open letter fatigue, which is why I think the Le Monde ones about Nadav Lapid were actually quite interesting, because they did bring our attention to it. But also I think that they are, like you say, Tim, it's interesting how effective some of them are, and they're quite good at bringing your attention to something quickly. But I also think they do speak to how powerless people feel about events, both in the industry and in the world. I think, we feel so completely powerless about what's happening. In Gaza, we feel powerless about what's happening with AI to, the screen industries in every sector of our lives. I mean, we've obviously got very little say of what happens with, Paramount or Warner Brothers. And there's just a powerless now. There's just a feeling that, the world is, beyond our control. Not that I wonder if we ever felt it was, but...
And I think they are, as we said, in certain cases, they are effective. I mean, the Trisha Tuttle support letters, I'm sure, played a huge part in kind of rallying support and changing the German government's kind of thinking.
And also in Trisha herself feeling so supported. And I think that influenced her decision to try to stay. And Nadav Lapid has spoken about, like, gosh, the public letter and also just private messages he got, I think, from people like Natalie Portman have really, lifted him during a sort of dark chapter. You feel people are with you, standing with you. You feel a little less alone, I guess.
Yeah. And on AI, I think the UK government has altered its position, on AI and the creative industries, and has listened to some of the concerns. I'm not sure to what extent the petitions played a part, or the open letters played a part, but I think they're part of a useful kind of lobbying armory now, aren't they? I suppose if you're a if you're a communications or lobbyist kind of person, they must be one thing you think about, amongst the tools you have. I think they're effective also because they tend to force the person they're addressed to, or the institution they're addressed to respond.
Yeah. Yeah,
It
yeah.
doesn't allow people to stay quiet, does it? So, and maybe that is a good thing, but on the negative, I suppose you could see it as an intimidatory thing as well. I mean, it depends where you sit sometimes.
Well, the cycle of what happened in Berlin, you could say that the initial open letters, you know, I guess what they did with the, looking back at it all now is they did, absolutely pull into the daylight how the Berlinale functions within its funding structure and a complex geopolitical climate right now. And it did completely overtake the festival, but it's an important discussion. And like you say, Wendy, the support that Trisha got from all those open letters and everything. Now, her position, presumably, she had very detailed conversations with the German and Berlin governments about how to move the festival forward in a safe, productive, manner in which free speech was preserved. So it did have the impact of pulling those into the light, which goes back to the point of festivals, which goes back to silencing artists and sometimes the unintended consequences of boycotts, well-intended boycotts.
And I think the other thing they do, the unintended thing they do, and, the Berlinale and all festivals have been quite vocal about this, is they do suck the oxygen out of the actual films themselves that are playing at the festival.
And the festival, if that becomes every headline. In Berlin, it was ad nauseum from at least that second half of the festival. We weren't hearing about the films. And it was, asking Channing Tatum or somebody, are you against fascism? And it's like, what has happened to the world? Yes, but Louise, as you're saying as well, like we can have free speech, we can have these debates at festivals, but then we can also just talk about films without asking every actor their political views because they're in an apolitical film, perhaps, changing topics wildly. Last week, French broadcaster TF1 Group's live channels and on-demand content were available on Netflix for Netflix subscribers in France only, starting on June 19th. And this is kind of Netflix's first partnership with a traditional broadcaster. And of course, this looks at consolidation across different models in Europe. I think it's very notable to me that TF1 keeps its IP. So Netflix is bringing TF1 Plus service onto its platform, but not licensing every single one of those contents that TF1 has. Tim, I know you've been looking at this. What are your thoughts?
Well, it's a kind of really interesting move by Netflix, which Netflix has always been its kind of own thing, and it's its own Netflix content, and you know what you're going to get. But here is obviously Netflix bringing on board another broadcaster, which has got its own kind of branded kind of section on the streamer for the first time, and yeah, it's a really interesting development because I think it's a kind of win-win for both parties. Actually, Netflix can keep its subscribers on its platform with much more kind of content and much more local content, French content. It means that somebody who kind of turns on their Netflix kind of platform really can stay and watch Netflix stuff, TF1 stuff, without leaving Netflix's ecosystem. And then so they get kind of eyeballs and time spent on the platform. TF1 in return, get access to the audience that Netflix have, which perhaps skews younger. They get to sell their own advertising within their program, and so it potentially boosts their revenue as well. It's a definite change of strategy when you kind of used to have everyone in their own sections competing, wildly, and you've got this kind of coming together. But that's already started to happen with other services.
Tim, can I ask you what's different about the TF1 deal? Because obviously Netflix has long licensed third-party content. It's had BBC
but this is not
programs and
licensing third-party content.
That's what I mean. And is it to do with the advertising? And obviously, famously it had Friends, which is a Warner Brothers, property.
Yes.
What's different about this deal?
With this, basically, so TF1 has its own dedicated section on the Netflix platform, and you can watch the live channels, as they play out live. You can watch all of kind of TF1's catalog on there. It's so before Netflix might have taken select TF1 shows. Now you've got access to all that TF1 kind of offers. So it's a very comprehensive kind of deal, and it was first announced last year, but it's finally gone live this week or last week. And, it's obviously taken a while to integrate because, there's obviously lots of technical stuff going on in the background, but yeah, other people are doing it. If you look at, in the UK, if you look at kind of Disney Plus, and they offer bits of ITV Plus, in the UK, I think Prime Video and France Télévisions has a similar kind of partnership in France. So, this is not new for other people. It's the first time Netflix has done it anywhere in the world. So, it's always been its own kind of walled garden, as it were, Netflix. And there was an interesting kind of interview in the FT actually with it's Greg Peters, I think the co-CEO of Netflix, who said he told them that they're going to use this deal to learn how these kind of partnerships work best, and he hinted very much that if this works, we're going to kind of lean into other partnerships with other potential broadcasters, I suppose, in other territories, perhaps the UK, the US. So you might, who knows, in 5 years' time we might see the BBC kind of on the Netflix kind of
channel on the
or ABC or something, I don't know, whatever. But I think the other thing that's interesting about this is that this is happening obviously a few weeks after the failed kind of not the fail, but Netflix pulled out of the bidding for Warner Brothers, and you've got the kind of Paramount-Warner Bros deal going ahead. You've got
we'll see, still under some scrutiny, regulatory.
You've got Sky ITV kind of merging in the UK. All these other people are kind of merging in all sorts of different ways, but maybe this is kind of Netflix's way of not merging necessarily, but bringing new content to their memberships and their subscribers at a time when there is enormous lot of consolidation going on.
Well, watch this space. Of course, you will keep up with Screen, because we will be looking to see who might be next for Netflix is reaching out a hand too. We'll see how this deal goes, and then keep tabs on it. Let's end on something lighter, because it's summer. We've got some hot blockbusters coming to cinemas. I'm just curious, have you seen anything this summer that you've loved, or something that you're absolutely looking forward to? Who's got their IMAX tickets for The Odyssey on July 17th?
I've not yet, but that is the one of the summer, isn't it? I mean, that's the one that's the big tickets.
Yeah, I can't wait.
For me, I'd like to see the Olivia Wilde film, The Invite. That's what I'm looking forward to.
Yeah, me too. That's open quite soon, I believe. Yeah. That sounds like my kind of summer blockbuster. Really smart. I did see Disclosure Day, which
me too.
I thoroughly enjoyed. Yeah.
Did
really,
you?
Yeah, I thought some smart... I say I thoroughly enjoyed. I thoroughly enjoyed a good 2 hours of it.
Yeah.
Like every other film I've seen for 10 years, I would like 20 to 30 minutes cut out of it. But I feel sort of sacrilegious saying that about a Spielberg film, and nobody cares what Wendy thinks about Spielberg needing a little chop.
But I think also the joy of the summer actually isn't necessarily a kind of big film. I mean, at Screen, we're all very lucky that we'll go to these summer festivals, Carnavari or Locarno or kind of Venice a bit later. And actually it's going to those and seeing the unexpected, we don't know the lineups for some of these yet, but it's those kind of summer gems, and they're always easier festivals to see films at, say, than Cannes. So you it's the unexpected treats to come, I think.
Yeah, and having said that, I have heard I think it's world premiering at Galway, which is the Children of Tuam,
Yeah.
the Irish story and the Element produced. I'm hearing that's really good, really strong from a person who's seen it. So there's just one to look out for. But yeah, we'll be reporting on some of those festivals, some of those summer gems. But yeah, I'm going to queue up for the Odyssey like everybody else on the planet, and I can't wait. Again, I'm already anticipating that might need a 20-minute cut for the Wendy remix, but we'll see. Thank you, Louise and Tim, for joining me today. Yeah, it's some tough topics, but really interesting to chat to you about this sort of culture of open letters and more. Thanks to everybody at Team Screen who makes this podcast possible, including our podcast producer, Ellie Calnan, and our head of digital, Orlando Parfit. And thanks to you for listening, and we'll be back again next Thursday. Thanks, everybody.